Hello, everyone. I am Carla Johnson. And in 1995, I was a fledgling marketer, and I got one of my first jobs working for HDR Architecture, an architecture firm in Omaha, Nebraska that focused on healthcare architecture, something I had never heard of before. One of the first things that I did in that position is that I went to a conference in Los Angeles, California for the Center for Health Design. This is an organization that looks beyond just the structure of hospitals and healthcare facilities and looks at the patient-centered part of care. Now, this was, in addition, not only new to me, but new to the industry, to really focus on the patient side, the experience that patients have, their whole experiences in the world of healthcare. One of the things that I really noticed was in the exhibit area, there were so many things that really looked like they were from the world of science fiction. Things that people were talking about, what healthcare would look like in the future, how hospitals and doctors would connect in neighborhoods right where people lived, how procedures would be done, and the technology that would be used. Now, for me, it was all crazy and I couldn't imagine it actually being done. But as we fast forward 26 years to 2021, we have a person who is actually pioneering a lot of this technology and showing how it can be done, not only educating the next generation of healthcare providers, but showing the entire healthcare profession how to take advantage of technologies like virtual reality to deliver care. So as I look at our guest today, I am inspired by his entrepreneurial spirit, his vision of the future, his attention to innovation, and all that he's been able to do to shape and change the world of healthcare. Connect the Dots is the show where we dig into what the world's most prolific and successful innovators do to connect the dots between what inspires them and how they actually implement it in their work every single day. Today, I am delighted to have Professor Shafi Ahmed with us. Shafi is a multi-award-winning cancer surgeon who has changed the face of medical education as well as the healthcare profession. He uses virtual reality to stream operations in order to educate people on a worldwide scale. In addition to being a tremendous surgeon, he's a futurist, an innovator, an entrepreneur, and a humanitarian. He noticed a tremendous opportunity in healthcare to take advantage of emerging technologies now available to us. And let's find out where he gets his ideas, inspiration for his ideas, and what he sees for the future of healthcare. Welcome to Connect the Dots, Shafi.
Hi, Carla, and thanks so much for the kind introduction, allowing me to speak on your platform.
Absolutely. Now, I want to give people the little tour that you just gave us because you're in London and you have a spectacular view out your window. Can you give us a quick tour of London for all of us who are a little hungry for travel?
Of course we can. So behind me, so I live in East End of London, Stratford. And so if I can direct you from the view, looking out west, over here in the corner, let's see if I can show you the corner. That in the corner is the Olympic Stadium and the Olympic swimming pool, that blue structure. As we go around to the kind of the left, you'll see suddenly central London appear. In the deep distance, you've got city centre. As you go further around, you will see the Shard and all of the buildings around central London Tower Bridge. And then keep going down, you'll get to Canary Wharf, and then you get to the Millennium Dome and across South London. So we have a kind of a 270-degree view of that beautiful backdrop what London has to offer. And often at nighttime, it's such an amazing view, of course, at nighttime.
You know, when I think about environments for inspiration for ideas, that's a fantastic one. That's a fantastic one. Now, you and I met a couple of years ago when we both spoke in Venice at the Fast Forward Forum. It's a tongue twister. I want to give a shout out to Heimo Hammer and the community because this was what came out of that conference was a series of essays. And this is your essay. Here we go. There's a great picture of you with your glasses on talking about virtual reality and some of the things that you see in the future of healthcare. Now, how did you make that transition? And I don't want to say just from a healthcare professional, but from a healthcare professional into someone who is such an avid technologist and really pushing the boundaries of healthcare and the role of technology in healthcare.
Yeah, so I think it's almost like being the right place at the right time, Carla. So if you think about my profession as a surgeon, we've always talked about how do we push that boundary of bringing new procedures for patients, looking at new technologies that might improve our skills. And I was very much what's called a laparoscopic keyhole surgeon. So we introduced that back in the kind of in the 2005, 2010. But that always meant that we were a bit innovative, thinking about what new ideas do we have, etc. And then what happened, of course, the technology became available, Carla, for me to do things that I was dreaming about. I'm a passionate educator. I've been an associate dean in the medical school at Barts for about a decade, teaching the art of surgery and using our curriculum to redesign new ways of thinking around medical students. Then the technology came out at the right time. We had connectivity, so we had super fast broadband, we had Wi-Fi, we had 3, 4, 5G connectivity. We've had all these technologies, exponential technologies that are now suddenly available, immersive technology, VR, AR, mixed reality, of course, the kind of genomics, nanotechnology, and AI and deep machine learning. So a decade ago, they weren't available. Suddenly they become available, and also it allowed me to say, okay, how do we use this? And I was one of the early, I guess, exponents of that. But I was just pushing an open door because I knew at some point that future was coming readily to us. And it's for us healthcare workers to reshape and reimagine what healthcare could look like, adding the value of these exponential technologies. So the first thing I did, of course, if we go back, was that whole Google Glass operation way back in 2014. Can you remember that 6, 7 years ago, where I was thinking about remote work? I knew that we had to be more remote in the future. We couldn't be face to face, but find new ways of delivering care and education. And the Google Glass came up. And that was my first foray, I guess, into using wearable technology to stream a live operation across the globe. And I'm really glad that 7 years later, we're now really looking at the value of being remote and having virtual care and virtual remote education.
And when I started off the show talking about my experience in 1995 and the technologies and the things that they were talking about, that felt very science fiction. It is very much what you're doing today. And I want to share a video that you posted on LinkedIn, I think yesterday or perhaps the day before, that shows some of this technology in action and how you use it. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex, who's the magic behind all of this, to play that video for us.
Hi everybody. Hi Shafi. So the HoloLens itself really allows us to reshape the way we connect people, we communicate with people, also to be used in teaching and training. Initially, when you put the HoloLens on, it feels a bit strange, but actually within a few minutes, it becomes quite normal. You feel as though you're just discussing cases with people in the same room, for example, like we do in normal hospital practice.
We can come in and actually look at this content in full 3D. And obviously when you're working in this case, the medical field, having a full 3D understanding of a situation, for example, is really much more powerful in solidifying how you want to navigate it in your mind.
The pace of change is remarkable. Technology is really shaping and changing the way we provide healthcare very quickly.
So I have a question. As we look at all of this technology and what you're able to do, and what you just showed feels a little bit like a Tony Stark and Iron Man. So I don't know if you ever dress up like that when you go into surgery. It might feel like that. But how, is there a certain level of resistance or apprehension from patients in using this potential approach to care because it is so different or unique compared to what they're used to in the healthcare environment?
Yes, that's a really good question. I think whatever we should do in healthcare is ensure that patients are at the heart of that conversation, or to ensure that what we're doing is improving outcomes, improving experience for our patients. That's got to be the key. And also to provide safety, to ensure whatever we're doing is safe. So those are the key parameters I've always worked with. I think patients are really incredible in the sense that they allow us to use their data, to allow us to streamline their operations, to allow us to capture some of their experiences. Very generous. And so I've never met much resistance from patients, because we're saying to patients, look, we want to help other people improve outcomes. We want to make sure we educate more people, to train more people around the world, for example. Very few patients will say no to that, as long as you provide them the context, as long as you provide a good way of consenting them and reconsenting to understand the process involved and understand that you're going to be as safe as possible during these procedures or adapting new technologies. So I've had a great conversation, rapport with our patients, and honestly, they're incredible. We forget how generous they are to us as an organization and as individuals. And I think the word is collaboration. Patients should be at the heart of our journey, to ensure that what we're doing is work together with them as partners, equal partners, to ensure that whatever we do makes sense to everybody, and to ensure we provide the right framework around ethics, around governance, around audit, and ultimately, of course, as I mentioned here, patient safety and patient outcome. So I think that works well. I think resistance that you mentioned earlier is more about healthcare itself rather than patients. Look at the last 18 months, Carla. Give an example. 18 months ago, we were doing face-to-face consultations. We suddenly said to them, because of the pandemic, you know what, we're going to go digital. Suddenly, they adapted very quickly. No one said no. Of course, we'll do it, we'll manage, we'll go online. And so actually, they're more flexible than we might think. They're more digitally savvy than we ever gave them credit for. And I think we need to do some of the hierarchy and ensure that patients also have that voice in pushing those boundaries forward and doing things a different way.
Then do you see, because you do focus a lot on education for healthcare professionals and those in medical school, do you see that there's a range of interest or adaptability between the students coming out of medical school who did grow up more in a digital world versus those who are established in the medical profession? Do you see a difference in people's willingness to adopt some of these technologies?
Yeah, and this is where we have a conundrum in the sense that if you look at medical school teaching or training, or even postgraduate training of healthcare workers, it's very archaic, very old-fashioned. Yet the new generation of students, or Generation Z, first of all, they're very digitally savvy. They understand how to use technology, how to innovate. They want different quality of life. They want different things out of their work as healthcare workers, and doctors, nurses included. But yet the curriculum hasn't really satisfied what we need to do to create this, what I call the connected health worker of the future, or the digital health worker of the future. So there's been a mismatch of where we should be and where we are. So what I've tried to do in that sense is to fix that gap by bringing courses like Bart's X at Bart's Medical School, Imperial X in Imperial Medical School, and I also teach at Harvard on their innovation program, to ensure that we give them the language and the skills required to be entrepreneurs, to be innovative, to change their mindsets, to add value to their work, to constantly get people to start thinking about redesigning either patient pathways or ideas, add value for their outcomes and things. So I want that whole community to rise. And so we are failing a little bit. I think what we pushed at our medical schools, it's beyond most people's comprehension at the moment. I'd love to see everybody raise a stand to produce the doctor that's fit for 2021 rather than, say, 2001, for example. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and we try to push those boundaries as we can.
Now, that's interesting about looking at what it takes to develop the curriculum in order to try and keep up with the technology, which is evolving so fast. Now, if we add into that the idea of the metaverse, how does that all come into play as we look at the future of healthcare, not just the technology and diagnosis and treatment, but how patients start to look at healthcare and privacy even?
That's a really good question. So I think, all these technologies that we're describing, I think augment healthcare. They won't replace any single thing, but I think we have more, arrows to our bow in offering different kind of therapies. So let's take virtual reality as an example. You think about where VR has come over the last decade or so. Initially, it was a concept for gaming for many years, and the hardware came out that was suitable to allow the amazing computing power that's required to allow VR to be used successfully. So when we were discovering what to do with this technology, only about 5-6 years ago, suddenly we came out with VR therapy, using VR for treatment, for post-traumatic stress disorders, for anxieties, for phobias, for depression, and now also used for a whole kind of gamut of experiences, even controlling pain for women going through pregnancy and labor, as maybe an addition or a replacement for epidurals or opioid analgesia. Who would have thought, say 6-7 years ago, that VR was suddenly transmit itself to actually therapy and medicine? So that's what we're seeing in terms of the kind of therapies involved. And so what we need now, of course, is that patient engagement to let patients know that we're offering different kind of services. The problem we're going to have going forward is, I think, the remuneration, depends on how we make this work financially, what resources we provide, and how does the insurance system provide that care, allowing new technologies to be adapted and supported to ensure that it's as affordable as possible. So there's the challenge we have, but that's just one example of where we thought that VR would be great for one thing, and it's turned out to be benefit to all of us very rapidly over the last few years.
Do you see that as these new technologies come into play, is there a shift in how people perceive healthcare and this opportunity to be much more proactive about healthcare versus I now have an illness and need to treat it? Or do you think that's more cultural?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question, in the sense that we want to move away from sick care to what's called well care, maintaining people's well-being and health before they hit the healthcare system. That's got to be the ambition for health and care as a whole. I think the experience of patients need to be understood, because they're going to enter a different world, talk about total triage, telemedicine, telehealth, remote monitoring of their chronic disease, for example. So we are entering this new world. And what's required is that intimate relationship and conversation with our patients saying, this is what we're offering you. And we love taking that journey with us, because it's going to be better for you. You'd be more autonomous in managing your healthcare. You'd be more in control. And health control is a big deal for us, to make sure that they have that control of their own healthcare. And that requires a different conversation. I think that goes from government down to ensure that we do have a new way of allowing healthcare to develop and to offer those services. I often call it what's called social reengineering of society. You're telling our patients and the public, this is where we're going to improve healthcare for all of you, given our resources and also the technologies available. So that's going to be the key. In terms of privacy, that's going to be a difficult one. And I think, Carla, we haven't been bold enough with understanding privacy and data. I often get asked the question, what about data and the confidentiality? And it's a problem. We've made it a problem. If you have a conversation, a difficult conversation with all the stakeholders, including patients and healthcare systems, say, look, we need to share this data more widely, share something. What are you happy for us to share with? What can we as a society allow to be shared? And so that conversation often isn't happened. People are too scared and frightened to confront the issues. But I think if you confront it, allow people to think, look, we already share data on a wide scale through social media, through interactions on the web. We share data openly. We don't question it. But when it comes to health data, it suddenly becomes more difficult. So we need to have those difficult conversations early and say, look, if we share data, would you be happy to share it anonymized? What kind of data will allow us to share? And also, can we monetize it? Because that's another key question that's going to come out fairly soon. We need to be bold enough, from a government perspective, say, what are those issues? How do we solve that problem? And it may be that patients opt in, opt out, give them the opportunity to have that, empower them to make those decisions that allow their data to be used wisely or not as they wish. So that's where we need to be. And we're just not confronting it quickly enough, in my opinion.
You know, and I think one of the things that I wish I could have as a patient, as we look at all of the data that's available on healthcare and even our own healthcare, is an access to my historical data, healthcare data. And as we look at other industries who are able to connect all of these different touch points on a customer journey across different accesses, whether it's one brand or another, they're able to put together a cohesive data set of what a customer experiences. Yet this is still a big part of where healthcare is behind, other industries, despite we look at how much technology is available in the care of a patient. Why do you think there's such a disconnect on that side of the business? And what do you think it will take to fix it?
So it's really good. Again, another really good question. I think so. I just think you need to give people choices early. So I remember seeing one of my colleagues working in the US, If you look at, even if you go to a website, for example, at the moment, Carla, it asks you whether you want to, in terms of GDPR compliance, it will say to you, do you allow cookies, non-cookies? If so, which cookies do you allow? And that's what we do all the time, every day of our lives. We don't worry about it, click, 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 click. What if you gave that page the same alternative? Had like a traffic system, red, amber, green, or something, for example, and saying, are you happy to share this, this, or the other? You click, and that's it. You set your conversation. That's what I'm allowed to share. And then that becomes much wider disseminated. And you have that choice individually, and that becomes set in stone. And then, of course, you go back to that point about having access to your own data. It's so important, isn't it? It's vital for you to have access to your own personal data for healthcare across your lifetime. That should be on a smartphone, a smart card, wherever it is. It should be. And if you go to other countries where the healthcare is disparate, we may not have primary or secondary care. In the UK, we're quite lucky. We have primary and secondary care that seem to connect, and it becomes more seamless. So you can share your data across the system and access it. Other parts of the world, it's not as easy. So that must mean we need to have data with ourselves. And it must be smartphone based. It must be something that's more secure, that allows you to move from place to place and share data to get better healthcare. Because everyone needs to know your history, what's happened to you, to make good, sound decisions when you see doctors for problems that you might have. So absolutely, we need to solve that issue.
What do you see as you look down now this road of the future of healthcare? Because you are at the head of a comet, really, in looking at technologies, what can be implemented. Like, what's the next big thing, or what are you working toward now where you really want to push healthcare in the next 10 years?
So there's a few things that come to mind immediately. We talk about remote care, connected care, so being more remote, using maybe 5G technology or having fast bandwidth to allow people to monitor their vitals, whether it's someone with diabetes or COPD, asthma, for example. We've seen these chronic diseases that we manage in a different way. So I think that's really clever, to empower the patients to have ownership of their own data and healthcare. I think that's really interesting. It's not about technology. So about 6-7 years ago, when I was talking about this future, Carla, I remember someone saying to me in 2020 during the pandemic, now that you've predicted the future, what's next? Because we were thinking about all these ideas years ago. So now I think it's about translation and implementation. Let's take example, AI and deep machine learning. It's been heralded as this great concept. It's going to change the face of healthcare. And I see that AI, for example, has had its hype, it's had its hope, and now we're seeing the reality. The reality is we're seeing the use cases, the real life use cases in healthcare settings, where the benefits are, how it augments healthcare. And so what we do now with technology is saying, okay, we've got them, they're available. How do they converge and work together? And how do you then use that in the healthcare system and then implement it on a much wider scale and scaling up that technology so it makes sense? So I think we're now in an era of implementation. The kind of exponential technologies that were there 5 or 6 years ago, we're saying amazing, that's wow. Now, hey, let's get real. They exist. How do we make them work? How do we fix healthcare? How do we improve it? So I think you'll see now clinical trials, validation, patient outcomes, using technologies that we've all kind of aspired to using in health.
You know, I love what you talked about, the hype, the hope, and now the implementation. And I think many industries, when they go through a big time of transformation and innovation, they have the first two, but I think people become let down when the implementation doesn't actually happen. How do you, as you look to your experience and what you've done in healthcare and the possibilities that you see, what advice do you have for innovators in other industries to help move from that hype, hope into that implementation in a way that makes the ideas that come up from innovators like you more likely to be adopted and actually put into play?
Yeah, so I think one thing you do need in healthcare is proof. And we rely on clinical trials, validation studies to ensure what we're doing is good enough, if not better than what's currently available. So you have to show that, and most healthcare workers won't otherwise adopt that change. So that's really important. And the way we do clinical trials or conduct clinical trials has to change. At the moment, a randomized controlled trial in healthcare used to take about 7 years for fruition. So you won't see the change that was made until way later, in which case the world has moved on 100 years maybe, right? And it's not relevant, it becomes archaic. So we've got to redesign the way we implement change as fast as possible, using a scientific basis for that. The other thing about verticals and cross verticals, I'm a proponent of collaboration, understanding, learning from different industries, whether it's smart cities, whether it's telephone communication company, whether it's using blockchain or looking at governments. I'm really into how do we collaborate better to create a better society and learn from our experiences. There's a lot to gain from us working in different verticals. I often go to conferences from different verticals, understanding other people and how they're managing change. So change management is one thing we learn from. Second is how you implement, how the barriers are adopted and changed. And again, similar, other industries will come to us to understand how do we overcome some of the barriers and hurdles of implementing innovation. So I'd love to work together. And during the pandemic, we've seen industry and health coming together to formulate new ways of thinking. And I guess back to your thing at the beginning, it's becoming new architects of the future of healthcare together. So that close collaboration is going to be the key going forward. And so much learning and really it's enriching to be around different people in different verticals. Like Carla yourself, came from a marketing background, your thoughts around healthcare, what would you do? And that whole thing is actually really useful for us to understand. It's the UI UX that we never thought about before. Suddenly it becomes a thing for us in healthcare, which we've just dismissed for decades.
You know, that's so true. And I've talked to you and your team at The Considered, which I want to make sure that we have time to talk about what is the overall user experience of a healthcare, a healthcare facility, a treatment, whatever that might be, not just in that moment, but to look at the mental health side of treatment and what that means. But you have a lot of things that you do where you really draw inspiration. One, you're an avid traveler. And that's wonderful for anybody who wants to see some spectacular shots of the places that you go. I don't know if you set out to be a photographer, but your photographer is really impressive. The other thing is you recently picked up flying, right? Taking flying lessons. And, how do you start to see things like that, like your attention to detail for other things like photography, like learning how to fly? How does that all connect when you walk into work every day?
Oh, so I think it's about the human spirit and what your desires and how you. It's not just about being a doctor, a healthcare worker. What else inspires us? And are we creative enough? So I like to think that we should be more creative in the ways we think, which I think will bring a different perspective to our practice of medicine. So the two examples you give, I'm not a photographer. I take a few pictures occasionally, and I just about manage to manage a camera. But it's just sharing experiences, and social media is very good for that on Instagram. I do a lot of my traveling pictures, if you like, to share experiences of my journey into this new world. I love to share it with a wider audience. So then, of course, the flying is really interesting. So I've always wanted to be a pilot from a long time. In fact, when I was studying medicine, I thought the other course I applied for was aeronautical engineering, but that was put on hold. I went to medical school, and there was a 30 years hiatus before I could go back to thinking about that, right? Because you'd be becoming constantly career. When I came back during the pandemic, it allowed us to rethink about our lives, about quality of life, what we want to do, ambitions we have. So I thought I must do this at some point, and I'm getting older. So I committed some time this summer. I've really enjoyed flying, and what it's shown me as a surgeon, learning processes, checklists, safety, which is part of what we do every day, can be completely, as we described earlier about different verticals, can be almost superimposed into flying, because always about checklists, about safety, ensuring you're doing the right thing, etc. So I found that transition quite easy, about ensuring that as we go through flying, the pre-flight checks, the flight checks before takeoff, the landing, whatever, it's all systematic, it's managed, and you're reducing risk, which is what I do every day in the operating theatre. And they're very similar analogies. And often there's a lot of analogies around training a pilot and training a surgeon. And I think I can understand the reasons why they are similar in some experiences. But I'm really enjoying it, Carla. And of course, you're welcome to come and fly with me when you're in the UK, of course, providing you trust me.
I will take you up on that. I will take you up on that. And I'll be the photographer for that. Now, you have a new venture that I just mentioned a minute ago called The Considered. And this I find fascinating because, again, you have drawn on many people to come together to collaborate on an area that you feel is very important as it relates to healthcare. Can you talk a little bit more about The Considered and what your goal is with this project?
So I was delighted to be asked by David Hunt, who's the CEO of Considered, to come and help him and become a non-exec director for the company. And we've been working for a number of years when he was based at Havas Links before on marketing, pushing for change, and we did different projects together on that. And so what I considered is bringing in global experts, people who are really creative, who are successful in that field, to bring them together on a global platform. So 2 things that come out of it. One is we've got wonderful people from around the world. Secondly, it's all virtual. We have no fixed offices. So therefore you can grab people where they want to work and be part of the considered. And then of course we allow people to be flexible in their work process. Hybrid working from home. And we have people literally working from all around the world at their convenience, which is really good. And I think that's forward thinking of us. Then it's saying, how do we re-energize our industry of marketing and ad agencies across the world? Can we do something different? And what we brought is different people. Myself as a surgeon, who would have thought I'd be part of a marketing agency, but we have ideas around creativity in healthcare. We've got other experts of different disciplines, all adding different perspectives, really different. And so we're trying to change and challenge the traditional methods and models of these global marketing agencies. And so far, it's been very successful. We're enjoying the journey. And we've got a great team that are working together. And hopefully we'll all meet together at some point in New York to meet properly once the pandemic is more under control. But yeah, so it's been a great journey for all of us. And we've got the right team also to look forward. And we're getting people in who want to think differently, who apply to us to work because, hey, we love what you do. I can work for any company in the world. I fancy come working with you guys because you're offering something new and innovative and a different way of thinking about the future of work, the future of relationships, the future of this marketing agencies.
You know, and I think it's in talking with your team, I love their whole approach. And it is such a 360-degree approach to healthcare, how we talk about healthcare, how we tell the story of where we're at now and the future of it from even a marketing perspective. Shafi, it has been a pleasure to have you. I know that you are so busy and in demand. I appreciate you taking time to spend time with us today and the guests on Connect the Dots. For anybody who wants to follow you more, take a deeper look into your work, where can people find you?
So I'm active on LinkedIn, so you can follow me on LinkedIn. I share some posts occasionally. Twitter at Shafi Ahmed 5, and I put some pictures up occasionally on Instagram as the virtual surgeon. So take your pick.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Best of luck with the rest of your flights, whether that's actually in the air or in the operating room or in the educational space. Thank you so much for joining me today, Shafi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. For everyone else, I encourage you to check out the work that Shafi is doing, not only from a healthcare perspective, but from a technology, from a future thinking perspective, and looking at the way that we can reshape the way we connect, how we reinvent change, and the idea of hype, hope, and implementation when it comes to implementing great ideas. I'm Carla Johnson. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Connect the Dots, and I'll see you next time.